Please be sure to spread out in the cafeteria and utilize both sides of the freshman sophomore cap. Administrators and staff members will be helping to spread.
Okay, I would like to go over question 4, just as like another. Notice that in question 4, you have 3 different if statements, but they are just sequentially, they're in a row. So you do still evaluate from top to bottom, and each if statement really does not affect the other one. You have to evaluate each one separately as you come across them. And this problem becomes more of like 3 questions in one, because you have to evaluate each of these scenarios separately and run through the code to see if that robot will crash in that grid, right? So this is kind of like amped up from question 1 and delete questions 2 and 3. So if I start with scenario A and I start at the top of the code and I start to like, this is what mental process you need to go through. Okay, ask yourself, first of all, I have to rotate left because that's a command. So I'm going to rotate left. Then I'm going to check if can move forward. This is true, I can move forward, but that doesn't mean I actually do move forward until I get in here, because that was true. I come in here and I execute this command, move forward. All right, now I'm done with that if block. So I'm going to come to this line and I'm going to rotate right, which means I'm now facing to the right. Then I'm going to check if can move forward. Well, this time can move forward is false because there's a block in front of me. So I'm not going to execute this body. So I'm not going to move forward. But I am going to move to whatever's after that and rotate left. So now I'm facing upward in that block. And then I have to check again if can move forward. This time can move forward is true because there is nothing in front of me. So I'm going to come into this if block and execute this command, which is to actually move forward. So it looks like A is not going to crash. Okay. The question is, which of these scenarios will have the robot crash? So I know the answer is not A. A is not going to crash. All right, but I should keep checking the other 2. Maybe none of them will crash. I don't know. That's an option, right? So starting with B, facing this way, new scenario, different board, different screen. Rotate left, I have to do it because that's just a command with no condition on it, just rotate left. The next line says check if can move forward is true. Can move forward is true, so I'm going to come in and actually do this command of move forward. Right. Then I'm done with that, so I'm going to rotate right like it says. Then I'm going to check if can move forward. Well, that's false now, so I'm going to skip over the body of that if statement and not do the move forward command. But what's after that is rotate left. So from that point, I'm going to rotate left. Now I'm facing upward. And I have to check again, can move forward. That's true in this case, so I'm going to come in here and move forward. And B lands there, that's the end of the code. It did not crash. Okay, it did not actually attempt to move into one of those blocks that are shaded out, and it did not move into a wall. So the last one, C, is, let's check it. Possibly going to crash, or maybe none of them do. Okay. Rotate left. All right. So now I'm facing upward. If can move forward, that's false. So I'm not going to move forward. Then I have to rotate right. Okay. I'm back to where I started. If can move forward, I can't move forward. That's false. So I'm not going to execute this body of the loop. I'm going to skip over the move forward. I'm going to rotate left. If can move forward is false again, so I'm not going to do that either. Basically, with this body of code, the robot is just like kind of moving back and forth, checking, but never ends up moving anywhere. So it's true, since it didn't actually do any movements, none of these crashed. That's the answer for number 4. I'm modeling that one because you have to work your way through the code, mentally checking every position in every scenario as you go. and determine whether the robot seems like it's going to be directed to crash into a wall or a block. All right, so I'm looking back at number 7 because it's the one that most people got wrong out of all the questions. So I'd just like to kind of model this one. Again, you got to check every scenario separately, but this time we have else's attached to the if statements. So that means if this condition is false, you would skip over this code and go to the else and execute those instead, right? But then after you're done with that, you have another condition to check and possibly either do this code or that code. But then also don't forget there's this one last move forward command at the bottom that happens no matter what. You are commanded to move forward after you're done with both if else's. You got to move forward. So sometimes that might cause a crash. Okay. So in example A or situation A, the robot's facing this way. If can move left is true. So we come in here, we rotate left and move forward. We skip the else stuff because we did the if command, right? But then we get to the second if statement, and if can move right, there's nothing to my right, so that is true. I am going to rotate right. I'm going to skip the else, and I'm going to move forward. Okay. A does not crash. That's not the answer, is A. Let's try B. If can move left, that's false because there is a block to the left. So we're going to skip the if body and do the else, which means we're going to rotate right and move forward. Now we're facing downward and we've moved to this spot. Now, if can move right, you got to think what is right of that robot if he's facing this way? To his right would be this way. Okay, so if can move right, that's false. So we're going to skip the rotate right, and instead we're going to rotate left, which from a downward direction, left would be this way. Okay, so now he's actually facing to the right. That's tricky. And then it's going to move forward. But that's okay. It happens to work out, does not crash. C starts off here, can move left is true. So we do rotate left and move forward. We skip the else. If can move right at this point is false because there's a block next to us. So we do not rotate right. Instead, we rotate left. And then because this has no condition on it, we just have to move forward no matter what. And that's when we crash into that block. So C is the one that crashes on that one. Okay. And this is how we have to kind of step our way through those commands to answer the robot command questions. All right, you'll see on our agenda that the main objective today is to complete Unit 5, Lesson 8, which is another make assignment. All right, this one is focused on using loops to make an app work. All right, so the first job is for you to actually go into Lesson 8, look at Level 1. You may have to sign in. And get familiar with this app that we are going to make. Okay, step 1, explore. First, click run and see what happens. Oh, very nice. I see a screen. It is filled with hearts in this case. Is yours filled with hearts? Oh, what do you see?
I see lightning bolts.
You see lightning bolts. Okay, so it's not always hearts. It's like some random shape, but there's a bunch of them on the screen. What else do you notice about those things on the screen? Besides that there's a bunch of them.
They have different colors and like position.
Okay, are they all the same size as each other? No. Okay, so there are a bunch of images that are all the same shape, but they are different sizes, colors, locations. That's what we see first when we open up this app. But then there's also some buttons at the bottom, right? If we click colors, it changes the colors of all of those objects. Do they move location at the same time or they stay where they are when I click colors? It seems to be just changing their colors, right? Still the same objects, still the same amount of space around them and stuff. If I click locations, it seems to be moving them randomly around the screen. And if I click shapes, then I get a different shape each time. I seem to be getting, let's see, a world, a music, star, earth, star, lightning bolt, heart. Okay. So this is called a lock screen. Okay. I don't know, I think they're kind of treating it like when you have a lock screen on your phone, it just displays a random thing so that this, screen doesn't burn out in a particular, pixel pattern or something like that. So, question, where do you think this app is using a list? How could a list be possibly behind the scenes on this app? Okay, keeping a list of the different shapes. Did you look ahead at level 2? Okay, because that's exactly what you'll see as soon as you get to level 2, where the code is supposed to be like a blank workspace, but they did give us that little bit of a start with a list of icon shapes, right? So that's where it's using a list. How do you think we could use a loop to make this app do all that stuff? That's the next big question. How is a loop going to help us with this app? We may have to reach back and dust off the cobwebs from before break and think about other examples that did something like this. Do you remember the example where there was a bunch of, say, displays of the same text on the screen, and it would show it in all different fonts or all different sizes, or change, like randomize the colors? We've done stuff like this before. It's been a while. We might be a little rusty, but I would like to get us started together. So move to level 2. When you're finished with that, I don't know if you can click submit or just click on level 2 at the top of the screen. And you will get to this workspace where you will see basically a blank code workspace, and your app is set up with these items on the screen. There are buttons and there are images. They seem to be initially just kind of arranged in a diagonal line. Each one of them has no shape whatsoever showing on the screen at first. They're just like objects to be set up and used to display on the screen. All right, so let's take a look at the activity guide. The activity guide is always helpful to help us organize our thoughts. Okay, so we tried it out. We made the screen change for all different, we clicked each button, we saw what happened. We talked about where it might be using a list. In terms of using a loop, my thought is that since these images, by the way, they're telling us right here what the names of all the items on the screen are, right? The home screen has the name home screen. The buttons have very aptly been named with good, meaningful, descriptive identifiers. There's a colors button, there's a locations button, and there's a shapes button. But also, once you run the program and get it working, you will see that all those images have identifiers of their own. And they have a consistent labeling scheme for their identifiers. They start with the word icon and then they just have a number attached. And since there are 20 of them, they are labeled with the names icon 0 to icon 19. Icon 0, icon 1, icon 2, icon 3, etc. Okay, now, when a person clicks on the colors button, the app is supposed to go through all of those images and change their color individually, because they all end up being different colors, right? So here's a little foreshadowing. We are going to use a loop to run through 20 different images and do the same thing to them, change their color. Or run through 20 different images, all 20 of those icon things, and change their locations. We're going to use another loop to run through all of them and change their shapes. That's what's going to happen inside the event handlers. Okay. So I have kind of filled in a little bit the activity guide with those basic ideas. The event handler for the colors button is going to have to change the color of each of the icons, all 20 of them, from within a loop, because I don't want to put 20 different separate lines of code to change each individual icon's color. That would be very repetitive and tedious to have 20 lines of code to do that. We're going to put a loop together that will make it happen 20 times, once for each item, right? Okay. So I also figured, because of that, when it asked me what kind of variables do I expect I'm going to need, I know I'm definitely going to need a loop control variable. I usually call my loop control variable I, because it's also kind of useful to think of I as the index in, say, a list. Oftentimes that happens. But I'm also going to create a variable to kind of piece together the name of each icon, right? If you have to talk about which thing you want to change the property of, and you got to do this 20 different times, but all of them have that consistent naming convention, icon 0, icon 1, icon 19. I'm going to build the name of the identifier, starting with the string icon and concatenating to that a number, so that I can have my current item that I want to work on, I can have the name of it stored in a variable. Okay, so if you have not already just dove in and started writing your own code, I invite you to join me now in the workspace. And I'm going to talk through and demonstrate how I would build this code. At some point, I might say, like, here's an example of one thing. You can kind of like take it and use it as a model for the rest. But together, let's first of all notice that they've given us this list of icons. This will be helpful when we want to change the shape of every one of these images on the screen. All right, so I think the first thing I would like to do is set this up so that when I run it, like if I click run right now, nothing happens whatsoever. You don't see anything on the screen, even though in design mode, you can see that those icons are there. Like they're not showing, they have no properties to show them up on the screen. So I think, first of all, I'm going to start with comments. I know that I always put my variables at the top, right? So I'm just going to kind of organize, put variables at the top. Then I'm going to have event handlers in the middle. Then I'm going to create a space for functions that I might want to write at the bottom. Okay. So event handlers will be used to make the buttons work and do what we want to do. But at first, even before allowing a person to click on a button, I think I would like to create a function or more than one function that will kind of set up the screen, because when you run it, you notice that when you first run it, it's supposed to show you all of those items on the screen with different colors, different locations, and then the buttons just change those things, right? So I'm gonna create a function, which means that I could either drag out the function block, right? Or I can just type the word function. If I drag out the function block, it sets up the whole thing for me, but I have to give it a name. I'm gonna name my function random shapes. Maybe randomized shapes, okay? Because when I first run the program, I'm gonna wanna see a bunch of shapes on the screen. And I'm gonna have to pick a random shape to display on the screen. So that's going to be my first task. I'm going to pick a random shape out of the list. And I'm going to store it in a variable. All right, so let me create a variable right here. I'm going to call it shape. Okay. Now, how am I going to get something out of the list? Well, to access something in a list, I have to give the name of the list, which would be icons list. And then I have to put square brackets. Square brackets allow me to access one item of the list, but I actually need to put an index in those square brackets. So let's just say, for the sake of, we'll just kind of pick one of them. What if we just set it to 0 for now? This is really just to test it out at the very beginning. This is not randomizing it. I'm just choosing 0 as my, what I'm gonna pick. So it's gonna go into the list and it's gonna get me this item. And what I wanna do with that is use it to set all of the icons to have that shape. Okay, so this is where a loop will come in to play. I'm gonna create a for loop, which you could drag out from the control box. You can drag in a for loop at this point. Okay. And I would like to go through all of my different images, which there are 20 of them. So I want my loop to run from 0 to as long as I is less than 20. So it'll really run from 0 to 19. Just like the names of these objects, icon 0, icon 1, icon 2, etc. Icon 19 is the highest one. So in that loop, I am going to set the property, which is in the yellow menu. I'm going to set the property of the current icon, which I need to get a name for. Okay. So maybe I'll just, it's really hard for me to demonstrate this in blocks mode. So I'm going to keep it in text mode. But first, I'm going to build the name of the icon. So I need a variable. I'm going to call it icon name or ID, icon ID. Okay. And it's going to start with just the word icon plus whatever I is. Okay. And that's what I'm going to use as the icon ID to set a particular property. Now, what property do I want to set? I want to change the image of this property. And I want to change it to whatever shape was chosen out of the list. Okay. Now, it just so happens I chose the first item out of the list and I put it into shape. So when I run this code, I do expect it to show me a heart at first. Okay, just for test purposes. But what this should do is basically each icon, I is going to keep changing every time from 0 to 19, every time through the loop. So it will construct the new identifier. So it will pick one of these icons, like icon 0 at first, and it will change its image to be a heart. And then it'll update I to 1, and icon 1 will change its image to heart, etc. All right. Now, in order to test this out, I actually need to make a call to my randomized shapes function. So I'm going to put that right up here after the variables as like kind of my first executable command. I'm going to ask it to randomize the shapes. Okay. Now, the name of my function, ultimately, I want it to randomize the shapes. Right now, it's not going to randomize it. It's just going to set them all to hearts. But we can easily change that, okay, in a minute. But let's see if we can get this working. All right, so far, all I've got is shown on the screen. The only thing I've added is a call to randomize shape. I've got a function randomize shapes, which declares a variable to create the name of the shape that is picked out of the list. And then it runs through all the icons and it sets their shape to that, their image to that shape. Now, if you forgot the name of the property, in blocks mode, you can use the little selection to choose the property you're changing, right? Like I know that image is what I want to change so that the image is my shape that I chose out of the shape, okay? But there we go. So now if I run this, oh, it's working. It worked really quickly. All of the icons got changed to hearts, and that's exactly what I expected because I hard coded in here icons list index 0. Okay. However, I don't always want them to be hearts. I would like it to choose a random value from the list. So instead of leaving it as just 0 right there in the square brackets, I'm actually going to use a random number here. Okay, so that it can just randomly choose an index from the list and retrieve that icon name or URL to be used as my shape. Now, what is the maximum index of this list? If it starts at 0 for heart, 1 for music, 2 for smile, globe is 3, tree is 4, bolt is 5, moon is 6, star is 7. So there are 8 different shapes to choose from, but 7 is the highest index, right? So I want to make sure the random number that I generate is between 0 and 7. Now, better programming practice, instead of leaving that 0,7, what if I end up adding icons to the list later? Then anything I add after the 7th element, I would have to come back here and change this 7 to update it if the list gets bigger. So rather than leaving it 7, I'm actually going to use the length of the list to determine the highest random number. So instead of 7 being the max, I'm going to put the name of the list, icons list, dot length -1. Remember, list dot length -1 is always the highest index you ever want to try to access. Otherwise, you're going to get an error. So if you're generating a random number to go be used as the index into a list, the list dot length -1 is the maximum you would ever want to use. All right, now let me retry this because all I did was change it to, instead of just always getting heart, now I'm gonna let it randomly select an item from the icon list when I first run it. Oh, this time I got a lightning bolt. Run it again, I got a globe. Run it again, I got a heart. Okay, it seems to be working. Every time I run it, it's picking a different shape out of the list. Okay, that's really good. Now, you know what's also great about having written a function that does this? Now, every time a person clicks on the shapes button, I could just call that function and it will change the shape. Right? So why don't we do this? We'll create our shapes event handler next. So I'm going to go into the toolbox and I'm going to drag into my event handler area an on event block. That's the one thing I highly recommend using the drag and drop feature for. Even if you typically write your text in your code in text, on event blocks with their very weird combination of brackets and semicolons, it's hard to get it right unless you're good at memorizing stuff. So starting off with the on event block from dragging it in, I would like to add an event handler for my shapes button. So the ID of the item is shapes button. And I would like to handle anytime a person clicks on that shapes button, what do I want to do? I want to once again randomize the shapes. Randomize shapes. So I'm going to make a call to my randomize shapes function. Okay, so let's see, shapes button, it's with an S, shapes button. So now when I run it, I do get a random shape starting off. Now they don't look the way I would expect. They're not all over the place and they're not different colors and they're not different sizes. But every time I run it, I am getting a different shape now. And now when I click the shapes button, it will change the shape. Working out good. Okay. Now that was actually the most complicated randomizing to do because we had to retrieve something from the list in order to know what to set the property to. Okay. When we go to randomize the colors and the locations, we actually don't have to pick them out of a list. So we're not going to need that line of code to like go into a list and pick something. We can just use random numbers for colors and locations. But otherwise, that process of making a function to randomize a particular property and then calling that function at the beginning so that it sets it up nice and random, and also making an event handler to call that function every time a person clicks the button, that's the process you're going to go through for colors and locations also. Right? So if you're the kind of person who wants to be more independent, at this point, you probably are going to race ahead and get through it faster than me. But I'm going to keep demonstrating, especially because I do have absent students and I'm recording for their purposes so that hopefully they can follow. All right, so the next thing I'm going to randomize, I'm going to go to colors. All right, I'm basically going to create a function to randomize colors. All right, same as randomizing shapes, but I don't need to pick the color out of a list. I'm just going to I'm going to copy and paste this whole for loop thing and just change it to, instead of setting the image to something, I'm going to change the color to something. Okay. Now, to test it out before I get fancy with the different colors, I'm just going to literally set a color there, like red. Okay. Now maybe from blocks mode, I can just double check that I've got the name of the property correct. Let's see, blocks mode. Set property, what is, okay, so there's text color, background color. Oh, I think I want to make it icon color. The icon color will be red because this is an icon. Now I do have a warning already. It says randomized colors is defined but not called. Well, of course not. I didn't make any calls to it yet. So I am now going to take the name of the function randomized colors and just the empty parentheses. I'm gonna put it up here at the beginning to randomize the colors when the program first starts running. Okay. So make a call to the function and try running it. Okay. Now again, I just set this up and I'm testing it to make sure it's going through all the icons and turning them all a particular color. But I set it to red this for now, and that's not really what I want. I would actually rather have a different color for every icon. So in this spot right here, I'm just going to put a random number, or actually a randomly generated color. That in itself is a little bit complex, okay? But I'm going to use the RGB command, okay? If you use the RGB function, you get to specify, remember, we've done this before, how much red, how much green, how much blue, and what the transparency level is supposed to be. I did notice in the example program, the colors are not solid. They are transparent. So a 0.5 transparency is probably good. I'm going to keep that. Okay. Now, if I left it just like this, nothing would change on the screen except that it would be semi-transparent. It would still be all red, no green, no blue. Because this is 255, highest value of red, no green, no blue, right? So I will show you, okay, now they look transparent, but they are still red. If I want them to be different colors every time, I need to put random numbers right in each of these slots. So except for the 0.5, that I'm gonna leave alone. But the other three parameters, the first three parameters, I'm gonna change those to random numbers between 0 and 255. So at this point, I'm gonna go to the toolbox. I'm gonna try to make this smaller for a minute. And under math, you got random number, right? I'm gonna drag random number in place of that 255. I'm gonna change that to random number 0, 255. And I'm also gonna put the same thing in for each of the zeros that were there for green and blue. Gonna replace each of those parameters with a random number between 0 and 255. That way, the amount of red, the amount of green, the amount of blue will all be completely random. So I will get a randomly generated color for this particular iteration through the loop. Okay, so now when I run it, ta-da, all of my icons are different colors. It's really hard to show all of that code on the screen because it runs really far off. But as you can see, the last parameter of the set property is basically an RGB command. Okay, maybe in blocks mode, it's easier to see. It's an RGB command. RGB takes 4 parameters. The first 3 are all random numbers. And I'm choosing 0 to 255 for each of them so that it can range all the way to any possible value. All right. Those who are at home or eventually using the video to learn can always pause and come back and watch something again. You can always do that later if you got stuck in class and end up working on it for homework. I will post the video on the agenda. But now I'm just going to basically make an event handler for the colors button. When a person clicks on the colors button, I should have just dragged this in. Maybe you know what, I'm just going to copy and paste the previous one. It's easier. Copy and paste this event handler, but change it to colors button. And choose and make a call to randomize colors function. So now we can click shapes to get different shapes. And we can click colors to change the colors of the shapes that are already there. Okay. That seems to be working. And then there's just one last button to worry about, and that is locations. All right. So I'm going to basically borrow from the randomized colors function. I'm going to copy and paste that and modify it so it will randomize the locations of each item. What needs to be changed now? I'm not going to generate a random color for the icon color property. I'm going to go back to set property. This time I'll drag it out of the toolbox from the UI controls set property. For this particular icon ID, what do I want to change? I want to change the location. So take a look at the options here. There is no location property, but there is an X and a Y property, and those determine the location of the item. So I'll start with X. I would like to change the location by setting the X coordinate to something random. So here I go again. I'm going to use random number so that each item is in a different location. Now, what are some good numbers to choose as X coordinates of the items? Let's see. On the screen, X can range from 0 to 320. So I think I'll start with that, 0 to 320, and see how it looks. So we let them go all over from left to right. They can be anywhere. But then I also want to set the Y property. So it's going to look very similar, just instead, use that same command, set property, change it to the Y property. And this time I'm going to look at the Y coordinates. They range from 0 to about, I'm going to say 400, because there's the buttons at the bottom. Maybe I don't want to overlap the buttons. Okay. So this is just going to set the location, X, Y coordinates of each item. But I also noticed that the sizes of the items change every time. Did you notice they're not all the same size? So this seems to be a good place to do that also. I'm gonna use set property and change the width and height to random numbers also. But the random sizes, I think I'd say, maybe I want them to go from about size 20 to maybe 100 pixels. So that's the width. And here's the height. Okay, I'm ready to test my randomized location function. So let's see, going up to the top, I'm just going to make a call to it right off the bat, even before any person has clicked on any buttons. I would like to randomize the locations of them so they're not just showing up in a big diagonal line anymore, but they are in different places and different sizes. Look at that. You run it with that new random locations function, and they're all over the place and they're all different sizes. In fact, you could keep running it different ways. You're going to get different locations, different colors, different shapes. We're so close. We're almost there. But the locations button still doesn't do anything because we just need to add an on event for the locations button to randomize locations. We're going to call the randomize locations function from there. And now it should change their locations every time we click the button. And you can still change the colors every time you click the colors button, change the shapes. And there we go. This is pretty much functioning the way we saw in the example. We've got functions to handle going through and building a new icon ID for every iteration through the loop so that all the icons get handled. In fact, I would like to run this slow and show you icon ID in the watch area. Okay, I'm gonna set a breakpoint. Nope, they don't allow breakpoints. Seems like, okay, but I'm just gonna run it slow and you can watch it as it runs. Let's see, here goes. First, it's gonna randomize shapes. And here it goes, setting the icon ID to icon 0, setting its property. Now it's changing I, and it's gonna work on icon 1, set its property. It must have chosen the bolt out of the list and it's setting each of the icons one at a time to have a bolt shape. So you can watch it in slow motion, going through, updating the icon name, which is then used to set the shape of that particular icon. It's going to go through that 20 times. So I'm going to speed it up a little more, a little more. You can see it going faster. Icon 10, 11, 12. Okay, then it's randomizing all the colors. It's going back through those icons and it's setting the property for each one. Now it's randomizing all their locations and sizes. Running all the way through the 20 different icons from icon 0 to icon 19. Now, of course, if I were to click on a button, it would start that process of running through these loops again, but I'll let you play with that. So at this point, I've pretty much demonstrated how to get the most of it working. There's a few little tweaks you could make. Like I think there's a background color change every time you change colors. You could add that in there. There's also like a little sound that dings every time a person clicks a button. You could add that in there. But otherwise, we have most of it working the way it should. And if you look at the rubric, I'm pretty sure we've hit and satisfied all of the points on the rubric completely, if you've got it working this way. So I'm gonna end my video for those who are absent. And hope you are able to use this to, stop, pause, do what you need to do, and get this lesson completed and working. Okay.